Hey, welcome to week 8 of class. This video, we're going to talk about what the heck are we doing this week. So we're right in the middle of module 3, which is focusing on the psychology of addiction. We are going to be in 2 chapters in our text this week. So we're going to be in chapter 7, screening and assessment, and in chapter 8, looking at strengths and evidence-based helping strategies. So we'll talk a little bit more about the content as we review as we get down the page a little bit. And then this week, the only thing we have going on is our discussion forum. So let's scroll down to week 8 and see what we've got going on in our little book. So our learning objectives for this week. So we've got kind of double learning objectives this week. So in our screening and assessment chapter, I think I mentioned this before, right? This class, 242 fundamentals, we are looking at building a foundation, right? The foundations of substance abuse. We are looking at building a foundation. So screening and assessment is really critical, as well as chapter 8, strength and evidence-based helping strategies. But we will look at those in more depth in other classes in the CAS program. So screening and assessment, you're going to get a lot of that in CAS 260 and 261. You're also going to get some of that in the practice classes, so 243 and 248, which is substance abuse counseling 1 and 2. You're going to get some of that in the gambling class and in the co-occurring class as well, specific to those populations. And the same is true for the strengths and evidence-based helping strategies. You're going to get a lot of that in 243, 248, the counseling classes, or the substance abuse counseling 1 and 2. You're going to see it in, and then you're going to see it kind of across all of the CAS courses, addictions and diversity, co-occurring, gambling, and the assessment and screening classes, 260 and 261, because we're always addressing, what are we doing? How are we, this is what we see. How do we address it? So again, we're just covering this in a very broad context, and you're going to see these in a deeper dive in each of these things more in other classes in the program. So our learning objectives for chapter 7 include highlighting changes in screening and assessment practices from a traditional medical model to the innovations of the Affordable Care Act. So the Affordable Care Act is the ACA. You might have also heard it as Obamacare. And the ACA doesn't just say, I think what got put out to most people is you have to have insurance. There's a mandated insurance, go to healthcare.gov and sign up if you don't have it through your employer or your school or whatever. But there's actually a lot more to that act. So looking at the ACA and the changes that it's had, to be able to describe well-accepted screening and assessment tools that are readily accessible to clinicians, to evaluate advantages and disadvantages of those various instruments and screening tools, to be able to describe the ASAM system of care and the integrated system of care and how they relate to screening and assessment, to help clinicians individualize the screening and assessment process for different types of clients, such as persons with co-occurring disorders and older adults, and to describe how the screening and assessment process can be an opportunity to build recovery capital through identifying strengths. So I would say that this is really our first screening and assessment is our first opportunity to really engage with our clients, to build rapport. And we have those opportunities to utilize motivational interviewing techniques to identify strengths and build on those strengths from the very first time we talk to somebody. It might just be, wow, this phone call must have been really hard for you to make. I'm so glad that you made it. That shows a lot. That shows how much you care about this, right? We're always building strengths. We're always pointing that out. So chapter 8, the strengths and evidence-based helping strategies. So I think this is really critical because we've talked, I think in this class, there's been a lot of self-reflection in our assignments, which is really critical as an LAC. We need to be able to know about ourselves, to learn about ourselves, to understand what our viewpoints are and how that impacts our work. Because guess what? Our viewpoints are our prejudices and our biases, and we all have them, and they impact all of our work. They impact our blind spots, the things that we don't see. They impact what we're comfortable with. And so I think one of the things that often that can happen is, you know, we relate to people, and there's this shift that happens with going from being a peer to being an LAC. And I know that there's an actual peer like license, right? But I'm kind of just referring to peer in this case as, you know, a friend, or a family member, or a person, you know, maybe you're a person in recovery talking to somebody else, right? And you're sharing your experiences. And that's great. In a clinical setting as an LAC, we need to know, how do we use our sense of self in our work? And how do we bring in other evidence-based approaches? Because it's not just enough to share our experience. We need to know different therapeutic modalities and different evidence-based practices in order to serve our clients. So it's both. It's both. I'm a person here with real experiences, and I'm also a therapist here with all of this knowledge. And I can take these things and apply them in my work. So our objectives here are to be able to describe strengths-based practices that honor the principle of client self-determination, focus on possibilities, and pay attention to clients' readiness to change. To discuss how harm reduction approaches work in a variety of settings. To explain motivational interviewing, solution-focused, and cognitive behavioral models of practice. To demonstrate examples of each approach both with individuals and in group settings. And lastly, to discuss challenges to the traditional treatment model of detoxification, acute care, residential, outpatient, and transitional living environments. So we're really looking at a lot in chapter 8. It's a very critical chapter. And again, I think that what I want to really emphasize is that foundational piece of what we're getting into this week, and the fact that you're already diving. For those of you that are not in the CAS program, this is an awesome introduction. For those of you that are in the CAS program, you're also probably already seeing this in more depth in some of your other classes this semester. So let's check out our content for this week. So we're in chapters 7 and 8 of our book. Check out the Biden-Harris administration's statement of drug policy priorities for year 1. I think that's helpful in speaking to, you know, I think our federal government, right, kind of sets the tone. And then based on those priorities, funding is allocated, research is happening, things like that. And then that trickles down from federal programs to state programs to individual programs, right? So check that out. Also, read chapter 5 in the Surgeon General's report. It talks about the many paths to wellness in recovery, which I think it's right. There are so many different ways to wellness, and we have to help our clients find what works for them. And that's part of what the strengths-based approaches are looking at. It's what are our clients' strengths, and how can we build on those to help them on their path to wellness. And lastly, we have a new suicide hotline. So I've included the suicide hotline poster for you in the context of this is a good resource for our clients. As we think about things like informed consent and writing informed consent, maybe it would be helpful to include this hotline number, because you can text the hotline, you can call the hotline, and now they are just there's 911 for emergency calls, and I believe that it's 988. I'm going to be embarrassed if that's wrong, because it's been a little while since I have actually looked at that. So it's just a good resource. It was just there for you to have and just build your awareness if you didn't know that existed. So let's check out our next steps. So engage in the content, engage in the course materials we just went over, participate in the discussion forum. Next week, we will wrap up this module. So we'll have a discussion forum and take an exam next week. So that's all happening. I will do a separate video to talk a little bit more about this week's discussion forum. So thanks for watching. As always, head on over to the homepage and post questions if you've got them. I'd love to hear them. Okay, thanks everyone.